Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unbiased America Live. I am your host, Will Riccadella, and I'm here again, finally, with Grant Phillips, who decided to show up. He said he was on sabbatical, which I think means jail. So perhaps you shouldn't brandish your handgun in the middle of the street, Grant, okay? Um, Joining us here on short notice is Dr. Mark Feldman, who is the former presidential candidate, the Libertarian Party. If you watched the Libertarian Party convention, you saw his passionate speech and his closing remarks. It was an excellent speech. The Libertarian Party convention was quite entertaining. In my view, to me, I'm coming from a more conservative, constitutional angle. There was really two serious candidates there. It was Dr. Mark Feldman and Austin Peterson. In my first question to you, Dr. Feldman, is are you going to endorse Gary Johnson for president?
Well, this goes to my very fundamental libertarian principle of self-control and self-determination. I'm against the concept of endorsement. I think people should think for themselves and decide for themselves. I'm certainly voting for Gary, and I'm happy to tell people why, but I don't think anybody should vote for him just because I said so.
I can totally, I respect that that decision. Actually, that's pretty good. Hello, Josie Wales. We also have Josie Wales here. We're on air, Josie. I like your AR-15 too. Hopefully we can figure her stuff out. I first wanted to talk about the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian Party convention specifically because I was watching it, and like I said, I really saw only two serious candidates. Gary turns me off insofar as he never relates a lot of his questions to individual sovereignty and natural rights and kind of natural law ethics and the Constitution. And I think he's just he's more dogmatic on his libertarian principles, and he's more unhinged from the classical liberal principles the country was founded on. And furthermore, I mean, it was hard to take, if you're debating whether, kids should have access at 5 years old to heroin if the state has a role, in stopping or mitigating situations like that. I think that's a little out of the mainstream. It doesn't turn me off, but I think it turns a lot of people off. Would you agree in that this is a year that the Libertarian Party could kind of cross over into the mainstream, become a legitimate third party? Would you agree?
Well, I think the problem is people have an issue with the mainstream. I think surveys have actually shown that people are ready for radical change in this country. And I think that aiming for the mainstream is not. I think there's problems with the mainstream.
I agree with that to a point. I don't know if it's necessarily. I think the mainstream has shifted incredibly far to the left. That I think a restoration of constitutional principles is what's needed. I mean, I think that actual liberties, in our founding documents and fidelity to those is really the answer to the rule of law, to individual sovereignty, to the people as individuals getting back their sovereignty, and public servants acting as public servants. I think that if you start to move away from that, when you start to question, what role does the state play in keeping, in certain things like keeping drugs away from children, I think that kind of gets off of that topic a little bit. You're not discussing the things that matter, and that could turn some people off.
Oh, I absolutely agree, and there's reasons for it. I mean, people want to kind of steer things in the wrong direction. And I agree with you. I think the Constitution is a fantastic document, but how well it works depends on how it's used. And I think that in terms of whether we talk about mainstream versus radical, the fact is when everybody's lying, if you're the only one telling the truth, that's
right.
pretty radical.
I totally agree. I once had a teacher, a postmodernist, tell me one time, he said, the reason I like postmodernism is because it creates chaos. And I said the reason I like the truth is for the same reason, because it creates chaos. I think it's at this point the truth has become quite radical. I have one more question on the left-right dichotomy. The left, the contemporary left, has really become more of the European left. It's really become. It's not that liberal Democrat Party that it perhaps used to be in the past. It's shifted to that more leftist, those Marxist underpinnings, those socialist underpinnings, and then Donald Trump is kind of like you're moving towards this more European right, this more nationalistic European right. Is it reasonable to expect, with the shift in the Democrat Party moving to that European left, that you would get this kind of a European right resistance? Is that do you see that as like this a legitimate struggle in this country, and that's kind of where we're headed?
Well, I haven't heard it put that way. I think it's very interesting. I tend to think that it's more than a more than European. It's almost just more extreme. That it's more divisive. I think that because we're in a system where people are voting against candidates instead of voting for them,
I agree.
it works to the party's benefit to have two very divisive candidates. Because on the one hand, it makes it very controllable. On the other hand, it keeps all of the people who are either in their party or leaning towards their party voting for their candidate no matter what, because they can't possibly let the other person win.
Yeah, so it's a matter of we don't have anybody to vote for that are espousing any sort of principle. That it's just it's a couple of personalities up there, and people are vote. You know I don't want to vote for Donald Trump. I don't want to vote for Hillary Clinton. There are things that would make me consider Donald Trump insofar as it relates to the Supreme Court. I don't want to lose that for generations to come. But I mean, it's really not anybody. If I was voting for Donald Trump, it would merely be because I don't want Hillary Clinton to become president. I mean, I don't have anybody that really espouses the constitutional principles that I would adhere to. And I think that's a good point. Grant, I know you have questions for Dr. Feldman, so go ahead.
Do. And what you guys kind of touched on a little bit earlier is the Libertarian Party, in my mind, has now begun from what I've seen, a sort of a barrage of outreach towards disavowed Bernie Sanders supporters who won't vote for Hillary. I never saw that happen in such a bold move when Rand Paul dropped out of the race and when Ted Cruz dropped out of the race. So in my mind, I personally think that this is a sign of the Libertarian Party moving to the left because, as we said earlier, the left is now sort of the mainstream idea in a lot of ways, and not that they're adhering to a principle, but rather moving towards a fad, if that makes sense. Do you see that? I'm sure you have a better understanding of the inner workings of the Libertarian Party strategy.
Well, I would change the paradigm a bit because, and it has to do with the whole idea of using the a political system, using our governmental system to try to achieve greater liberty. Uh, when it comes to the Libertarian Party, the spokesman for our party and our principles is the chair of the Libertarian National Committee, who's Nick Sarwark. The presidential candidate, vice presidential candidate, have a very different role. They are not spokespersons for the party. They are not the guardians of our principles. They are our soldiers that we're putting into battle. They are a weapon that we are using in self-defense to try to protect us from the other parties that are trying to oppress us. So when you think about it that way, it's kind of like when you think about the libertarian stance on gun rights. We don't believe in the use of force, and a gun is nothing but a tool for the use of force. I mean, it's a weapon of force. But a weapon of force can be, if you control it, can be used to protect your rights. And if you don't control it and somebody else controls it, it can be used to infringe on your rights. And the same thing is true of government, and the same thing is true of candidates. That our candidates, it was a decision of our delegates. Did they want to choose a ticket that best reflected our fundamental principles, or did they want to go with a ticket that they thought would be most effective in self-defense against the other parties? And it was very, very close, actually. And Gary Johnson did not win on the first ballot, but he did have was able to put together a coalition to get and really to achieve a consensus that this time around, just like similar to last time, we're going with the best ticket that we think could be successful in the general election.
So you think that so Gary Johnson, in my mind, is could have easily run as a Democrat in a lot of
and so could Donald Trump.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yep.
But he could just, in that regard, it was more of a shift left in order to have the best chance of winning. You don't view that as necessarily a change in the party's principle, correct?
Correct, and it's more an issue of pragmatic approach versus an idealistic approach. Your principles can be the same. One of the things I've said is before Barack Obama became president, I was concerned that he had a set of principles that was dangerous for America. Then after his first term, I felt a lot better about him because I felt he had no principles at all. So the question is, as a Libertarian Party, we are the party of principles. And one thing which is interesting is Gary Johnson is very principled. He really is. He's very honest, but his principles are not lockstep with Rothbard or any of the other factions within the Libertarian Party. I mean, he's a small government, good government person, and I give him a lot of respect. And I think he's a very good candidate for the party principal, and I think once we've made that decision, I think we should give him the best opportunity to be successful. And then, it's 4 years later, we get a time to reassess again.
Yeah, I think he's gonna do well, better than he ever has before, of course. But it still baffles me why this sort of bold marketing to bring in outsiders didn't happen after the Rand Paul and Ted Cruz dropped out. I think maybe because libertarians are just tired of the Republican Party in general and just said no to try to make that move. I saw Austin Peterson doing some campaigning to bring in Ted Cruz voters. Why do you think it was the bolder move now than it was with?
Well, I think that I think it's just numbers that Rand Paul had 1 or 2 million supporters, and Bernie has about 30 or 40 million supporters. I mean, it's more than an order of magnitude. Now, the interesting question, though, is how successful it's going to be. In my campaign, I recommended a different course of action. I wouldn't go after disgruntled Democrats or disgruntled Republicans. I think there are enough non-voters in this country that they could determine the outcome of the election if they could be motivated to vote. So these are people who already don't like Democrats or Republicans, and I think that although the Johnson Wall are looking at that and they think that's valuable, that hasn't been so far the point of the spear of their campaign.
I just want to get Josie in here for a second and introduce Josie again because it seems like her technical difficulties are all over. I did it somehow, probably, but I didn't really. But it's good to see you, Josie. Thanks for coming on. Can you talk so I know I can hear you?
I think so. Can you hear me or no?
I can hear you, and your hair looks great, by the way. It'll as usual. I wanted to lead in, and I'll get you in here on this question too, Josie. I talked to Austin on a couple occasions, and a majority of the times we talked about the Libertarian Party establishment, and that he had a hard time breaking into this like Libertarian Party cabal kind of that was really Gary Johnson oriented. I talked to Wayne Allen Root about it too, and he said that the Libertarian Party is really exclusionary. They turn a lot of people off. Is there any truth to that? Did you encounter the same thing as running for president on the Libertarian Party ticket, or as a candidate?
Well, I had it was easier for me because I've never been a Democrat or a Republican, and I've been on the Libertarian National Committee for 2 years, so I already was very familiar to the leadership. I actually took a different path because my goal was to show that you did not need name recognition or fundraising ability. It's just a different way of doing things, and we'll see how things work out in the long term. But my goal was to try to be the second choice of the majority of libertarians, so that I would have support both on the radical side and the pragmatic side, and to stay away from this cult of personality idea. And then
right.
if Gary or Austin or no one could put together a 51%, then I could come as more of a uniter. to really represent the spectrum of libertarians.
And a lot of libertarians would be upset if I didn't ask this question, but the Libertarian Party, like you said, is a principled party. It's the purest party. And it's odd to me that they would have as a nominee Gary Johnson, who really is kind of this more pragmatic candidate. So do you think that Gary Johnson really does represent the constituency, the members of the Libertarian Party? I mean, you know, you brought it up earlier and you did touch on it. But I mean, there are voters, there are constituents that want to see libertarian principles espoused, that they don't want these things compromised, that they don't want, they want them out in the open, they want a public debate on these principles. And I think some libertarians feel disenfranchised too by the Gary Johnson pick.
Well, you know, you get the vote. I think people are less concerned about Johnson than his vice presidential pick. But again, it's like anything. You could be a nonviolent person and you don't want to initiate violence. But if you want to protect yourself in self-defense, you get the most powerful and effective weapon you can. And I think the feeling is that that even if they don't represent the principles of each faction of the party, they are the most powerful and effective weapon that the Libertarian Party has to use. And again, it's not up to our candidates. This is one of the things I differed with Darryl Perry, one of my colleagues and opponents about. Is that I think that a political candidate is a terrible person if their if their mission is to send a message, because people they don't get convinced, they don't believe the things that candidates say, because they know that candidates say things to get votes. That's what everybody does. If your goal is to educate people and to send a message, you should write a book, you should teach a class, you should be an activist, not a candidate. Everybody knows that the job of a candidate is to win an election. So I disagree. I think that we should get the most likable. I think that's excuse me. I should say it's a reasonable strategy to get the most likable, persuasive person who'll make it the most effective ticket, and then just make sure they don't turn on us. That we can do. And then you know, the thing is this: is that I don't know whether the American public is ready for an idealistic libertarian candidate. But I'm sure that the public won't be ready for it before the Libertarian Party is ready for it. And I think we're getting closer. So I think that there was a lot more concern about how well our candidate could express principles this time around than last time, and more last time than the previous time. But so we are moving in that direction.
All right, Josie, let me ask you this, and then I'll go to Grant. Do you think, to Dr. Feldman's point here, do you think that it's Gary Johnson's job to really kind of, instead of not, you know, make the case or have a message, I mean, he should have a bully pulpit, and being the Libertarian Party candidate, he should be able to espouse these ideals and make the case in a public sphere. Would you agree with that, or would you agree with Dr. Feldman on that? What is Gary Johnson's role? I mean, what are the chances of him winning? Shouldn't he make the case for these libertarian ideals that go out full-fledged and go down, you know, espousing them?
Do you mean winning the Oval Office?
I'm sorry. No, I mean that he's most likely not going to win. That he should make the case for the purest Libertarian Party principles.
Well, okay. See, this is a tough question. I will say that I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know. You know, what would be the appropriate method to. And okay, we'll go back to your original question. Does he have a chance of winning? No, I don't. Not even a little. Nope. So should he spread the libertarian message? Should he make the case, or should he try that pragmatic approach of just you know, broadening the libertarian base, bringing different people into the party? Okay. If we're gonna go with pragmatic, my perspective is to get your foot in the door. You ease people in. That's always been my approach. Is to basically be, and I hate that ridiculous cliche, which is so paraphrased, but that be the change you wish to see. But that's the way I've always gotten across to people and gotten through to people. But if you'll ask, I mean, Mark will remember that my very first question at the presidential debate was. do any of you actually believe, I don't think I said actually believe because that would have been condescending, but do any of you believe that you will, that you are going to be the next president of the United States? And every single candidate said yes, absolutely. And I love you, Mark. You know I do. I actually said to Will before this that I believe that you would have been the best spokesperson and nominee after best as in most charismatic, educated, professional. In any case, well,
now's the time that I get to ask Josie the question.
Yeah.
Okay, so the only 4 candidates I think that have a mathematical possibility of getting a majority in the Electoral College would be most likely Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Gary Johnson, and Jill Stein. Mm-hmm. Of those 4 candidates, who do you think is the best candidate for president?
Oh, honestly, I hate to say this.
Who would make the best president, I guess is really the question.
Whoa. To be completely honest,
that's a tough question.
That is a tough question because it's between Jill and I know, between Jill and Gary. I know I hate to say that, but he's very disingenuous. He's changed his mind. He's uneducated. He is unable to make snap decisions, which you need to be able to make. He's unable to, and this is all my opinion, and it's just my opinion, man. But
better than George W. Bush.
Oh my God, George W. Bush was amazing. No one took him seriously. I think he started the process of taking politics and the presidency as an absolute joke. I mean, someone threw a shoe at his head, and he barely missed it. Did he miss it? I don't even think he did.
Yeah, he ducked. He was like a ninja, actually. I'll give him credit there.
My point is this. If you think that Gary Johnson is probably either tied for best or the best of the 4 candidates to be president, how can you say that he has 0 chance to win? This is the way I look at it. Clearly he's the best candidate. So the question is
not clearly to you, clearly to you.
Wait a second. Is there 0 possibility that the public would pick the best person to be president? I would say the chances are small, but I think it's wrong to say it's 0.
Okay, you know what? You're right. I'll take back 0. I will retract 0, and I will say slim to none.
I want to know how Grant would answer that question. How would you answer that question, Grant? Out of all.
Oh my gosh! Everyone knows. Everyone knows. I'll. Please.
No, I really think out of that list, Donald Trump. I mean, I don't like.
Obviously.
I've written numerous times that I'm against his trade policies. I think they're dangerous. I think he's unpredictable. But that's kind of like dangerous and unpredictable. I guess that's going to be our thing,
Exactly. Hand him the nukes, man.
He upsets the political groundwork. He's got a really good chance of winning, and he's pro-business. I don't know. People will be really offended by him.
Yeah, I mean, look, that would be. I would have to agree with Dr. Feldman on that one, even though I reluctantly would have to agree, only because of the property rights in there. That I think that for property rights, Gary Johnson would be a better candidate. I don't know what Donald Trump's going to do. Like you said, his protectionism's dangerous. The way he's treated the Constitution in the past, specifically on property rights, means they're a joke to him. So I would have to say I'd have to try my luck with Gary Johnson. That's not to say I'm going to vote for him. I'm in California, so my vote doesn't really necessarily matter anyway. So I can kind of have fun with it. But
I'm in Ohio, so we're the only ones that count.
Yeah, you see, your vote means something. That must feel good. Mine never means anything. I'm from New York, and then I live in California. I mean, you couldn't go to the 2 worst places for that.
Well, Will, you kind of mean nothing, so that's.
That is true. I do agree with you there.
I will say that listening to you, Dr. Feldman, and Will, that you've changed my mind a little.
All right.
A little teeny.
Who'd win?
Let me tell you one story though, and this was, I was running for president. I needed to get probably 2 or 3 people to stand up to officially put my name in nomination. So I got Paul Stanton, who's running for Senate as a Libertarian party for the Libertarian Party in Florida. But I wanted to get somebody from the anarchist wing and then somebody from the pragmatic wing. So I got Jim Fulner, who was happy to say that Darrell was his first choice, but I would be his second choice. So I needed someone from the pragmatic side. And I know Judge Jim Gray fairly well, and I asked him, and he said that he would be happy to, and that I would be his second choice. And he said that I'm one of the few people that he would consider running as my vice president. But he said out of loyalty to Gary, he couldn't possibly do it. So then I went to Gary Johnson, and I said, Gary, you've said I'm your second choice. Would you be willing to go up and put my name in nomination as your second choice? And he immediately got a big smile and said, am I allowed to do that? And it was just no, well, that's a complicated issue or any of this. He really is very genuine. People think he waters down his principles for popularity or acceptance or mainstream. No, he just has very moderate principles. He's a moderate guy. He believes in good government. He doesn't believe in wasting money, and he's not a. I don't think of him as a revolutionary, but he really is what he is, and I like him very much as a person. Now, as I said, he wasn't my first choice either. But
who would be your first choice if you could divorce yourself from the Libertarian Party primary race? Who would you have voted for?
Well, here's the thing: is if I could have chosen the person, I would have. If it wasn't me, it would have been Darrell Perry. Just because I think that I think we're at a time where a real revolutionary message would be really could help the movement go forward. And it's not so much like his personality, but the way it would reflect on the Libertarian Party would say, we, the Libertarian Party, are ready to make a radical, principled decision. We're going to move away from pragmatic politics and really go to principle. Because the fact is, we're not going to win on fundraising, and we're not going to win on name recognition. But if we're going to win, it'll be on principle.
Do you think McAfee could have done the same thing for the party?
I have a minority view on Mr. McAfee. I look at his history, and he's quite the salesman. He's quite the magician of hype. And unfortunately, I think over time that makes it more and more difficult to run as someone who's really a principle.
So he's lied in the past to get headlines.
I'll
say it.
He believed it at the time, but it's just his company got famous off the Michelangelo virus, which was supposed to be a weapon of mass destruction, and turned out it only really infected 300 computers and didn't cause any damage. But it did make McAfee software into a big success. And there's been a number of other times, and recently with the iPhone and with hacking WhatsApp, that it's just a lot of hype. And he gets a lot of publicity. But again, I don't think we're going to win on publicity. But what we could possibly win on is principles. Mm-hmm. But that's a paradigm change for the public. But these things happen. We do hit tipping points.
I have one more question about the Libertarian Party that may fire some people up, but might not. Are you familiar with Randy Barnett and Ilya Soman?
No.
Okay, they're constitutional scholars. Randy Barnett's at Georgetown, and he's very libertarian. It makes a great libertarian intellectual case in academia.
I apologize. I think I have been in touch with Mr. Barnett.
Yeah, you probably. I mean, he's a huge name. He just came out with the book, Our Republican Constitution, and he's kind of like he was at one point Rothbardian. He was at one point. He's always been a member of the Libertarian Party, but he's kind of, as he's gotten older, he studied philosophy. I think his undergrad was in philosophy, and then he started to move towards constitutional originalism. And I think that do you think it would be good for the party to kind of move away from the intellectual philosophy of Rothbard and move more towards these more, I would say, I mean, I guess libertarians would call them pragmatic, kind of constitutional originalists like Randy Barnett or Ilya Soman, to addressing a lot, like to restricting government and making, and enhancing individual liberty? Or do you think the Rothbardian path is the way to go?
Well, one of the things I say is I'm not a "this is the way you should do it" libertarian. I'm a "this is the way I do it" libertarian.
Right.
And I consider myself an originalist. I consider myself a constitutionalist. And the fact is that if you consider it, an important, I have said that I think the most important clause to look at in the Constitution right now is the necessary and proper clause.
Yep.
And that our goal should be the government should only do what's necessary and proper. And that doesn't mean that we should be abolishing agencies. What that means is that we should be building in the private sector those things that the government is doing inefficiently and ineffectively. And once we have them in the private sector, then it's no longer necessary and proper for the government to do it. And if it's not necessary and proper for the government to do it, it's unconstitutional for the government to do it.
And so Barnett talks about that in his latest book. I'm sorry, he does talk in our Republican Constitution. He talks about the necessary and proper clause to the same degree that you are right now. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just the fact is that once we can build all of our societal necessities, very good in the private sector, the Constitution becomes basically an anarchist document because there's nothing. If we can do everything, so there's nothing necessary and proper for the government to do. Now, you could say, well, about the judiciary and national defense, but the fact is that I think that this is where I would like to steer the Libertarian Party. And in fact, I have suggested a second principle. We have the non-aggression principle. I've suggested as a companion principle the positive empowerment principle, which says we should maximize the power of all individuals to control themselves, their property, and their environment without infringing on the rights of others. Mm-hmm. So I'm all about individual sovereignty. My motto of my campaign was #empower yourself. And I think that we should get away from talking about freedom and limited government and talk more about liberty and unlimited people.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting, the necessary and proper clause, because it was Joseph Story that kind of broke down the walls of the necessary and proper clause, because the Fugitive Slave Acts that were in the Constitution, Congress or the executive didn't have any way to enforce them. And then he kind of used the necessary and proper clause to say that, yeah, they do have a way to enforce it, and he kind of expanded the power of the necessary and proper clause, and it's kind of gone downhill from there. So it's a really great point. Grant, would you agree with me that, and this is my position, that they should move away from that Rothbardian anarchist element more towards a constitutional classical liberal element, and that they should embrace more Lockean ideals as opposed to the Rothbardian ideals? I know everyone's going to hate me, but that's what I think.
It's true. I mean, I don't think that you can really market Rothbardian libertarianism on a large public scale. I think it was Dr. Feldman that said that earlier. People aren't ready for that.
Yeah.
And to think that you can grow with that for the long run, I don't think is an effective strategy. Can it get there at any point in the future? I guess we'll find out. But I actually want to touch on what you were saying earlier about John McAfee, Dr. Feldman, and also something you said earlier in the show where the Libertarian Party needs to put out candidates that can win and that are good leaders. And I look at a lot of the candidates the Libertarian Party has put out, not just McAfee, and I don't see them as being very marketable to people as themselves, as candidates, not necessarily what they believe, but as candidates. Do you think that is somewhere where the Libertarian Party has, on the local scale especially, fallen short in putting leaders and winners on stage for people to hear?
Well, I think there's a market for candidates just like there's a market for anything. It's a question of supply and demand. The worse the job it is to be a candidate, the harder it is to get quality people to do it. I mean, look what the Democrats and Republicans have got. I think what we need to do is to make it easier for candidates, make life better for our candidates, and the fact is we are getting better and better candidates all the time. I think having two former very well thought of governors on the ticket is fantastic. I think that people like Austin and my other colleagues and John McAfee and everybody. It's a great group of people. Now I want to take a half step back though and make a comment about, because I think it's important, regarding this idea of the Rothbardians. The Libertarian Party is a coalition, not a cult. It's not going to have a unified set of principles. There's always going to be factions with different talents, and the fact is it's the most extreme Rothbardians are the ones who go out in the rain and get the petition signed and help us get ballot access year after year after year, and they're very important. I've described the Radical Caucus as being the anchor of our party. And like any boat's anchor, if it's engaged all the time, you're never going to get anywhere. On the other hand, if you don't have an anchor, you drift and get lost at sea. So they're an important part, but it's not all of the party.
Right. So basically, what you're saying is, what I think, and I would agree with you, is that the Rothbardian aspect of the Libertarian Party has really become a cult of personality. And I think that a lot of that turns people. No, I know it turns me off to libertarianism. It's not that Rothbard didn't do a brilliant job discussing and writing about economics. I think it was just when he delved into other aspects of philosophy where he really lost me. And certainly on natural law ethics and so on is where he's just went off the rails completely. So I never really saw him as a good standard bearer for the party initially. And I think that guys like Randy Barnett, these guys that are out there fighting the good fight, are the ones that people should really be following, and the direction the party really should take. And I know some libertarians would agree with me, like Grant and probably Matt Palumbo and so on. But I don't, I guess it's up. You're right. It's up to libertarians, and I think that's part of the problem is that libertarians are so individualistic that they just end up a majority of the time just fighting with one another, and it really turns everybody off, and it really turns people off to the party in general. Would you agree with that, Mark? Dr. Feldman, I'm sorry.
I don't. Mark is fine, and
okay.
No, I disagree. I think, in fact, I think what made our Constitution great is not that it was designed by geniuses, but rather that it was designed by a bunch of bright people who really hated each other and fought all the time. And you can see in many aspects of our Constitution that all of the checks and balances that really help to make it powerful are there because people didn't trust other people to make decisions for them. And I think the Libertarian Party is similar. I think that the problem and first of all, I don't start off by comparing the Libertarian Party to the Democrats and Republicans. I would compare them to the Reform Party, the Communists, the Socialist parties, the other many parties that have come and gone and haven't left a trace. Libertarian Party is there year after year. We're growing in prominence. We're growing in influence. So from that aspect, we're doing great. Now, if you want to say, well, why haven't we become a major force like the Democrats or Republicans? It's because we don't sell our principles and we don't run on money. And so that will, as long as money is the most important thing. However, we're reaching a time money was the most important thing because television was the most important thing. But it's a new age, and I think the future is bright.
Do you have any more questions, Grant, before I start ranting on?
Oh, continue on.
I was going to say that, is that another problem with the Libertarian Party? I think it was Wayne Allen Root that said the Libertarian Party turns so many donors off that they can't get the money necessary to really make it anywhere. I mean, that people just take their checkbooks and go right to the GOP. I mean, that was like specifically what he said, is that the Libertarian Party really has a foundational problem, that it can't really build a foundation to really build off of.
Well, he calls that a foundational problem. I call it a foundational asset. Now, the name of my campaign was Votes Not for Sale because I had a $5 limit on contributions. I wouldn't accept more than $5 from anybody. But the fact is, if I became popular like Bernie Sanders and had 20 million contributors of $5 each, that would be about, if it's $150 million, that's about 50 times more than what any other libertarian has ever raised. So no, I don't think it's a problem. And in fact, the problem we have in our country today is we don't have a republic anymore. We have an oligarchy where the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and the media are all owned and operated by these wealthy special interests and multinational corporations. And the Libertarian Party is the only party that's immune from that for exactly that reason. We are the party of principle. But see, the thing is, we call ourselves the party of principle, but we say it like it's a good thing.
But one could make the case.
In politics, principles are a problem.
One could make the case, though, Dr. Feldman, that the Libertarian Party doesn't have that problem because it has no power, and that power breeds special interest groups and these corporations that run the party, and it's really the people to blame that don't pay enough attention to what's going on in the system. We've yet to see a Libertarian Party with any power that could be susceptible to special interest groups or that money that they would afford them.
Well, it depends where your power comes from. If the way I look at it is this: there's 320 million people in this country. That means there's 320 million people who can be controllers and 320 million who can be controlled. So you make a fraction out of it. That means that the average person can control one person, which means that for everyone that controls more than one, there's somebody else that controls less than one. So my goal as a libertarian is to try to get everyone to control themselves. So if each person controlled one person themselves, there wouldn't be anyone for government to control. There wouldn't be anyone for the corporation to control. Now, but what that doesn't do is it does not allow you to control large numbers of people. But what the idea is to form a coalition. I've said that I like the idea of 50 sovereign states. I just don't think 50 is enough. I think we need 320 million. I think if we all respected each other's sovereignty as individuals who have the right to control themselves, we'd be moving in the right direction.
So you see just a broader breakdown in the civil society as a whole?
No, I think that's what civil society is all about, respecting each other's sovereignty.
No, I agree, but I mean, you were saying that that's part of the problem, is that you wish that there was more individual sovereignty, and that on the individual level that people would respect each other's individual sovereignty, that there'd be 320 million states. Do you think that that's a problem within the civil society? Do you believe that that's government or the parties fracturing the civil society, or outside elements fracturing the civil society? Because we do have people actively voting for one party to take from people and redistribute wealth. So there is somewhat of a breakdown.
I think, though, if you can look at it in terms of self-defense, that it's a process. I think that Bernie Sanders says he doesn't say that he wants to control the country. He says he wants to free the country from the millionaires and billionaires.
Yeah, I know. True. I don't. So free them from the millionaires and billionaires, and then make it subjugated by government, which it already is. And the millionaires and billionaires can only do it working through a government that have a monopoly in the coercive power. That he doesn't get, that he's part of the problem and just wants to create a bigger market for it. Again, more power, it means you breed more interest groups.
I have a question for you. One thing that has concerned me about libertarians, and you said earlier you were constitutionalist, concerned me about the LP and their view of the Constitution, is many of them have been very outspoken about what I view as judicial activism. So like Roe v. Wade, gay marriage are the two hot-button issues that, in my mind, is a complete just disrespect of the Constitution from an originalist standpoint. Not that I'm against either of those things, but that the means do not justify the ends. And I think a lot of libertarians praise that as the decisions justifying, sort of a pro-liberty stance. And I didn't really view it that way. What was your take on both of those, how both of those historic events transpired? Did you support the Obergefell decision?
Well, it's interesting. Here's the way I look at it: is that I think marriage should be none of the government's business, and I don't think that extending government marriage to another group makes the people any more free in and of itself. On the other hand, I think one of the greatest things about the decision, which has basically made same-sex marriage legal across the country, is there is now several states that are looking at doing away with government marriage and no longer having government marriage because they don't want to have to certify same-sex marriage, which makes me think maybe we should require teaching homosexual sex in public schools, and maybe that way we can get rid of public schools.
I wanted to get Josie in on that Rothbardian question. I'm getting feedback. Anyone else getting that? You are? I just wanted to get Jody, because I know Josie's more Rothbardian. If the party moved more towards the constitutionalist camp, the libertarian originalist camp, the more classical liberal camp, would you still remain within the Libertarian Party, or you do want it to remain that hardline Rothbardian kind of like anarchist camp? Like, I mean, really derive the principles from there and move towards that direction, as opposed to moving towards that constitutional originalist direction?
Oh man, I would say it's tough. I would say I've been pretty consistent since I was in my early teens in regards to my I guess my philosophy, my beliefs. My opinions have changed here and there, but I would say I remember I almost lunged at Alex Jones. I was on the Alex Jones show at one point. I know. But I would say I am 10% constitutionalist.
90% Rothbardian?
Nah, not even 90, to be honest.
50.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the 40s, like, neocon?
No.
But the 40s, you're willing to, you're not really dogmatic or stuck on either one. You're willing to, you're kind of, you take a middle position, or you're skeptical?
I would say it's miscellaneous in there. There's the Constitution. I would say constitutionalism and pragmatism are mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to be both. Mm-hmm. Yes, they're very similar, and they can go hand in hand. And a constitutionalist can be pragmatic, but someone who's pragmatic doesn't necessarily have to be a constitutionalist. So I would say there's a little bit of a mixture in there.
So what you're saying is, if Gary, you're not thrilled about Gary Johnson, so out of that pool of Libertarian Party candidates, who would you have? Obviously, we have Dr. Feldman sitting right here, but who would you have wanted to win? I mean, who would you have seen as a viable?
Oh my gosh! Honestly, McAfee, wild card. I don't know for a fact, and no one knows for a fact. There are no charges against him with the whole,
Belize thing?
Yeah, the whole Belize thing.
That whole murder thing. I hate when that happens.
Yeah, real. You're one to talk, Grant.
Yeah, right? Guys in prison, in and out of prison all the time over here. God.
But I mean, people have been put in jail. I mean, actually put in jail for years, put to death after being convicted of murder, and it turns out they're completely innocent. So I'm going to say that would have been okay. See, it depends on what you're asking. If you're asking who could go up against them and really make waves and really just get it out there and fuck shit up on social media and mainstream media and all that, I would say it would be McAfee.
Okay, so he would have been that would have been your guy. That would have been your kind of like your libertarian ideal candidate. That's my
pipe dream. That's who I
Do you think other anarchists kind of would fall in line with that? That they would agree with you? What did you think in the anarchist community? Okay. Were they split?
Yeah, I would say yes. I would say yes.
Were any supporting Gary Johnson?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
So I guess they were all in lockstep on that one, that they were going to support Gary Johnson.
Yeah, that was and no one was outwardly or publicly, vocally coming out and saying no, 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 Gary Johnson, never Johnson, none of that. It was more just not endorsing him, not supporting him, and it didn't used to be that way. There used to be anarchists that did. Back in 2012, a ton did.
Oh, really? So they supported him then, but then kind of learned more about him and wouldn't support him this time around?
Well, I would say just within the last couple months, just the way he spoke and the way his debates, and he had ample time. Yeah, he had a lot of time. He's been on interviews.
He's been everywhere lately.
Yeah, and even before the convention, a lot of my statist friends from my part-time weekend gig, a couple of them have been like, oh yeah, what do you think about this Johnson guy? Are you behind him? And I always get that face that, yeah, are you behind that guy? And I'm like, why? And they're like, I don't know, he just seems like a doofus.
I know that Dr. Feldman has to leave here soon.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to ask you guys, do you have any questions that you want to ask him before he takes off?
I've asked him all the questions.
You asked it. You got it. Yeah, I know you have to leave, Dr. Feldman. I don't want to keep you longer.
Yeah, I don't want to speak ill of anybody, but we all have our strong points and our weak points. And as I said, John is great for generating publicity, but the problem is when you have all sizzle and no steak, it makes you vulnerable. In our pre-debate debate, I think they gave us the opportunity to ask another candidate a question, and I think I caught him off guard when I asked him. I told him that I'm kind of a nerd myself, and I wondered if my question is, could you tell the audience what RSA encryption is and why it's so great? And he could not answer the question at all and talked completely around it. And of course, RSA encryption is public key encryption that allows that's the encryption in every browser with a public key and a private key. You let everyone have the public key.
He didn't know what it was.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's what made encryption available to the public. I mean, it's
right.
Anyone who knows computer security should be able to answer that in a reasonable way in 60 seconds. It's just having a separate lock and an unlock key. So
interesting.
So, it really showed. He was an antivirus guy. He was not a computer security guy. So when he's talking about cyber warfare from China and hyping these things up, if he was in a real debate with somebody like Hillary Clinton, I think they would just tear him apart.
Really?
And the murder has nothing to do with it. I'm a physician. I think anybody's capable of anything. And if you think it's a problem, prove it in court. My biggest concern in what happened in Belize is when he donated automatic weapons to the local police without any concern about how the effect of these corrupt officials would on the local population. But he did it for his own best interests, and to me that's a problem. And I think it would be a problem if he was our candidate.
I do have one very quick question, Doctor. You said that if McAfee got into the debates with Hillary or Trump or what's the other one, Bernie Sanders, whoever they are, obviously Bernie would seem like the most aloof, all over the place guy. However, do you really think Gary Johnson could speak eloquently and represent and be able to rebut intellectually, intelligently, and in a succinct way better than John McAfee could?
Well, I'll tell you, I think you have to go with your strengths, and this is where I disagree. A lot of people in the Libertarian Party feel that Gary needs to have a debate coach and really learn how to attack and how to defend. My feeling is he should go with his strengths. Gary Johnson is a really nice guy. He's an honest guy. He's a caring guy, and I think that if he came across as genuine and caring and interested in good government and more freedom for people, I think that would be the best defense against and really the best way to promote our ideals. Go with your strengths. McAfee could make a scene, but you get somebody like Hillary Clinton, she's an expert attorney. She can cut. She'll have the things what she needs to have. She has the dirty tricks. The thing is, if someone's a nice guy, dirty tricks don't work on him because he's still a nice guy. Mm-hmm. So I would recommend that Gary just go with his strength. Be Gary, and the fact is, he is the best candidate. He's the best of the group. All he has to do is show it.
And I have just one final question before we go. It's actually a viewer question. Do you see the Libertarian Party affecting any change within the Republican Party, moving them more towards, originalism or libertarianism in this race? Do you see this as an opportunity for the Libertarian Party to do that?
No. I have said that having the Libertarian Party try to influence the Republican Party towards freedom is like the FBI trying to influence the mafia towards lawfulness. It's not what they're about. They run on money. They run on power. They're not. Freedom gets in the way of campaign contributions because you can't control it takes control of the economy, controlling people to raise money. That's why these corporations steer so much money to the parties, because it's a great investment. No, the Republican Party will never represent freedom. The Republican Liberty Coalition is doomed to failure. And the one thing we need to do as libertarians is don't compete by compromising on our principles, because the Democrats and Republicans are much better at it than we are.
All right, and Dr. Feldman, do you have a Twitter handle or anything that you want to, or a website?
Sure. I'm Dr. Mark Allen Feldman on Facebook. Votes Not for Sale on Twitter.
Is it at Votes Not for Sale?
Yeah, at Votes Not for Sale, all letters and numbers.
Okay, very cool. Also, follow Josie on Facebook. And Josie, what's your Twitter handle? I don't know off of my head.
Let me see. My Twitter handle.
Are you on?
Huh?
Are you on Twitter? You're on Twitter, right?
Yeah, you're goddamn right I am. My Twitter this is an old one, at Josie the Outlaw 1.
All right, and just Josie Wales on Facebook. You have a public page. You have a public page there.
Yes.
And Grant Phillips is at We Are Capitalists. I myself, Will Riccadella, I'm at Unbiased America, and on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, I will talk with Adam Friedman, author of The Naked Constitution, about the 14th Amendment, the same-sex marriage case, Obergefell, and 14th Amendment jurisprudence and original meaning. So you can watch that again Saturday morning at 10. And I want to thank you again, Dr. Feldman, for coming on such short notice. I really do appreciate it. And thank you too, Josie.
My pleasure.
Thanks again, and have a great night, everybody.
Hey, you're welcome, Will.
Yeah, well, whatever, Grant. We don't like you anyway. All right, take care.